The morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. And we'll begin in Nigeria, where President Muhammadu Buhari has expressed worries over the slow pace of administration of justice in Nigerian courts. Against that backdrop, the president has proposed the implementation of a 12-month time limit by the judiciary on the hearing of criminal cases from the High Court to the Supreme Court. In the same vein, he now wants all civil cases to be concluded within a period of 15 months. And President Buhari says the country's justice system is in need of urgent reform and recalled the lengthy process it took the courts to decide and dismiss the election petitions he filed to challenge his losses in the 2003, 2007, and 2011 presidential polls. He spoke at the 60th Annual General Conference of the Nigerian Bar Association, where he also expressed displeasure at the issuance of multiple and conflicting court orders by judges, pointing at the more than 6 conflicting court orders issued within 6 weeks during the recent leadership crisis that rocked his party, the All Progressives Congress. Dr. Batsi, the NBA conference, has a way of giving us and dishing that topical issue that will be discussed for days to come. I recall the last time the president attended, it was also controversial when he said, national security should supersede human rights. This time around, he seems to be putting the blame at the doorstep of the judiciary. But is the judiciary really to blame for all of this?
Not quite. I think that that statement by the president at the opening of the 60th Annual General Convention of the Nigerian Bar Association and the first virtual conference that association will hold in 60 years is consistent with the concerns that have been expressed by many juries and also lawyers about the need for reform in the justice administration system in Nigeria. And I would like to just isolate some of the issues that he raised and comment on them. Of course, he was represented by the Vice President, who is himself is a very senior member of the bar profession in Nigeria, and who, as Attorney General and Commissioner of Justice in Lagos, has had to deal with some of those issues that were highlighted for attention by the President of Nigeria in his contribution to that conference yesterday. What are the issues? The first concern that the President raised is about the delay of justice. And it is, the popular maxim is that justice delayed is justice denied. And in his speech, he gave certain indications in which that can happen. He cited, for example, the challenges he had in 2003, 2007, 2011 with his own petition as regards the outcome of the presidential election in those years and how there was very long delay. And of course, he was right in that regard because we've seen cases of persons spending 3 years only to be removed within the last year of their tenure in office. But with regard to election petitions, that has been corrected in the subsequent amendments of the Constitution and the Electoral Act. And at the end of the day, he said by 2011, when he was now the respondent and Atiku was the petitioner, Atiku versus Buhari, that took 6 months. And his main argument is that if we have been able to correct that with regard to election cases, we should be able to do the same for criminal cases and civil cases. And he was recommending in his speech that, criminal cases should not take more than 12 months, civil cases should not take more than 15 months. However, I think we'll need to draw attention to the fact that the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, the ACJA, already addressed this concern about speedy trial, about avoiding unnecessary delay. And what you will find in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act is, the specific provisions about the front-loading of cases, speedy hearings and all of that. The Vice President was talking about, who was representing the President, had in fact was, the architect of a similar measure in Lagos State when he was Attorney General. The front-loading of cases, the computerization of the judicial system in Lagos State, the multi-door courthouse system that was introduced by the Lagos State government at that time. You find traces of that at the federal level, in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act. But what we have seen is that Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which was signed on May 29, 2015, it was the last bill that is signed into law, has not been faithfully implemented. It's been largely bastardized. But now that there is a concern at the highest level about speedy dispensation of justice, maybe we need to take another look at some of those provisions in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act and see how, they can be, implemented. However, it's not just about saying don't delay justice. Yeah. Do we have enough judges? Our judges are overworked. The methods adopted in many of our courts are still methods that belong to the last century. We need to digitalize the system, right? Some people have argued that one of the ways in which we can dispense justice quickly is also to decentralize the appellate courts.
So is that the issue of special courts where we are seeing...
No, special courts are different.
Increasing courts for them?
Yeah, you have at the state levels, you also have appellate courts, so that it's not every case that goes through a central, seemingly unitary system. So there can be more activity. And then you have more judges. Some judges have cases in their docket that they cannot finish in the next 4 or 5 years. So they are overworked. They do not have enough facilities. So there should be reform at that level for you to get a quicker dispensation of justice. Another issue that was raised by the president at the NBA conference was the issue of technicalities, over-reliance by our courts on technicalities. Now, the president talked about the need for common sense and that the law must make sense to both lawyers and non-lawyers alike. Yes, you cannot argue with that in principle. But law, the pith of law, of justice dispensation, is about procedure.
Yes.
So what is being suggested here, I don't understand. Are we saying that judges should, manipulate the procedure?
Just so that the common man can understand.
Just so that technicalities can be suspended. The counter-argument, perhaps, would be to call for judicial activism, right? Which is whereby, judges look at the common sense. And we saw a lot of judicial activism during the days of Uputa, during the days of Esho. But then, judicial activism should not become judicial rascality. As to the issue about dispensation of justice, is there also something we can do about our lawyers? Lawyers abuse the process. They come up with all kinds of frivolous, procedures. They come up with all kinds of... So it's for judges also to take charge of their courts, to take charge of procedures and not allow lawyers, to abuse, to do forum shopping, to abuse process. As for the appointment of judges, yes, I agree, we should look further afield. But perhaps maybe states should also be allowed to appoint judges, and the powers of the Chief Justice should be reduced, and the National Judicial Council should be reformed. Because the Chief Justice of Nigeria is almost like a monarch with tyrannical powers.
There's definitely a lot to talk about, many aspects to this, but that's all we can take on a news headline at this moment. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll have the trio of Roger Zodiri, Michael Westin, and Aaron Akirjola to give us updates on Africa, global business reports, and COVID-19. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. Our ever-dependable Roger Zodiri is here to give us an update on Africa Business Report. Over to you, Roger. Good morning.
Good morning, Disoa. Good morning, Rafai. Good morning, Doctor. So we kick off with the U.S. Treasury. That's the department run by Steven Mnuchin. They put out a statement reacting to the AFDB meeting. These are just some highlights from the statement. Of course, we covered this meeting, exclusively on Arise News yesterday. So they thanked the AFDB, the African Development Bank, for holding the virtual meeting. They emphasized the relevance of the AFDB in economic stability across Africa. They highlighted the AFDB's development fund as important support for Africa. They urged the AFDB going forward to analyze steps towards a more cost-effective model, because the AFDB, gives out loans and supports a number of African nations across the continent. And then they also, this part here, they emphasize freedom, more freedom and more funding for independent oversight as far as ethics and other matters are concerned. And then they pledged continued partnership between the United States and the AFDB. So it was looking at the election that's coming up where Dr. Akinwumi Adesina is running unopposed. This, can be interpreted as a big vote of confidence coming from the United States because, this is him from yesterday giving his address. He thanked the board of governors for the AFDB for all their support. He emphasized working together. He talked about Africa losing over a decade of growth and how, in addition to stabilizing Africa, we also have to stabilize the AFDB itself. He talked about the record capital raise done back in April of $115 billion. He talked about a $3 billion social bond, one of the largest social bonds in history ever floated. He talked about the support that they've given to each region of Africa, Northern Africa, Central Africa, South, West Africa. He spoke a lot, so it was a very spirited, encouraging speech that he gave yesterday. And at this point, I was very hesitant on the Global Business Report to say that he's 100% guaranteed to get his second term. But after this, statement from the United States, I think I can risk it and just say that at this point, he's almost certain to get his second term. So we look forward to him, continuing his continued leadership at the AFDB and the support that they will be providing to Africa, especially in these very trying times, which was also emphasized by the United States as well. We move on to Zenith Bank. We're looking at the group. They held a virtual forum, which was supposed to look at exports, diversification of exports with regard to a post-COVID-19. The central bank was part of that forum. Again, this forum was held by Zenith Bank. And hopefully we get some of these images up here. But the Director of Trade and Exchange Department of the Central Bank, Dr. Ozomena Naji, is pushing for an inclusive exports board. She's working for an inclusive CBN control board to boost non-oil exports across the country, and also to look at loosening up the bottlenecks that are holding back exports, non-oil exports in Nigeria. So much of the emphasis was on Nigeria not having to depend too much on oil and being able to diversify our income base. So again, the Nigerian economy, just to emphasize this, Nigeria's economy is diversified from cocoa to palm oil, sesame seeds, rubber. We have a diversified economy. I really want to emphasize that. But the issue is, of course, our revenue base. So this is something that was discussed at this forum that was held by Zenith Bank, the virtual forum. Also, the Group Managing Director and CEO of Zenith was also in attendance, Mr. Ebenezer Onyeagu, and he also, bolstered the argument that this is something that needs to happen. But I don't know. So on the other hand, some folks are asking, do we need another board? I mean, if you look at, let's take a look at the top 5 performing sectors for Q2 as far as the second quarter was concerned in Nigeria. So financials, telecommunications, coal and mining. I want us to look at motor vehicles and assembly, right? So if you look at a company like Innocent, which is an indigenous company here in Nigeria, these are the few sectors that actually did well. I think only 13 sectors grew out of another 33 or so were in the negative region. So as far as GDP is concerned. So motor vehicle and assembly, if you talk to an Innocent and use Innocent Motor and say, what do you need to do to export what you put together, the vehicles that you make to other countries? Rather than get a board, would it just be a matter of analyzing, talking to the key players in the non-oil sector and talking to them about how they need to boost efficiency, productivity, what kind of cost measures it would take for that to take place. So, it's a good initiative that Zenith put together. What the CBN Director of Trade and Exchange Department was talking about was, it's something that needs to happen. But do we need another board? That's the question there. But again, that's the forum that took place. Up to Treasury bills. We had another auction yesterday. And if you look in blue there, the rates, at this point, I don't know whether we're going to get into the negative region. Now, this is the Treasury bill auction that took place just yesterday. 1.14% for the 91-day bill, 1.8%. Well, that actually climbed. The bill was 1.3. If you look at the green bar there, climbed to 1.8%, and then the 364-day were at 3.3. Again, inflation is at 12.8%. So the rates there continue to be negative. But still, if you look at the subscriptions, there's still a lot of funds that are going there. Finally, South Sudan is looking for an emergency loan of $250 million from the Afri-Exim Bank, which is also run by a Nigerian. Central Bank said it's running out of dollars. That's the South Sudan Central Bank. Their reserves reportedly support only 5 days of imports. That is scary. It has approached the IMF, but no response. Yet, analysts are complaining that South Sudan's debt profile is opaque. There is no transparency. Let's look at a quote here from the Deputy Minister of Agriculture. He said the Afri-Exim Bank has agreed to continue with the process of finalizing an emergency loan, provided that the government of South Sudan goes through the right procedures. That would involve transparency. And then finally, their exchange rates. This is their Deputy Central Bank Governor. He said, he was speaking to the media, he said they've got 3 exchange rates. One for the central bank, that's at 165 to the dollar. Commercial banks at 190. Parallel market at 400, and their currency is the South Sudanese pound. There we go. That's African Update.
Yeah, Rotus, well, thank you very much. First, let's talk about the one that affects us directly, which is the AFDB process that will be concluded today.
Yes.
Well, I can understand where you're coming from, that with the tempered statement from the United States Treasury Secretary, that it looks like it will be a shoe-in for Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, considering the fact that the same Stephen Mnuchin had objected when the initial report clearing Dr. Adesina of wrongdoing was submitted, leading to the setting up of the 3-man panel that was led by former Irish Prime Minister, Irish President Mary Robinson. Well, in that same statement that Stephen Mnuchin presented, you will see that there were also some caveats, although those caveats are not so strong.
Right.
Talks about the need to pay more attention to ethics and accountability and transparency, the need to make the staffing process more, competitive. But all these were, just innuendos, and the need for greater reform. But what nobody can take away from Dr. Adesina is that under his watch, since 2015, the AFDB has done consistently well, in fact, much better. Its capital base is larger than it had ever been in the entire history of that organization. Only recently, the Fitch rating system rated the African Development Bank again AAA, with a stable outlook. And then, of course, we've seen responsiveness to African issues on the part of the AFDB under Adesina's watch, with the $10 billion support for the fight against COVID-19. And indeed, the theme of this conference is about making Africa better after COVID-19. So on the record, I expect that Dr. Adesina should be able to have a second term in office and gain the majority from both the regionals and also the non-regionals. Yes. Because we cannot rely only on, the Americans sounding nice to us. But by the end of today, hopefully, we will know how it has gone. He will get the tenure not by voting, because the General Council of the FDB does not vote. Right. It arrives at a decision by consensus. We hope that Dr. Adesina will not only get that consensus, but also be reappointed for a second term by acclamation.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
All's well that ends well. Thank you so much, Rotus, for that. Moving on now to more business updates. Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. Start off in Asia as usual, and good morning. Chinese shares up, boosted by technology shares. Data showing that good growth from industrial firms in China and pointing towards a healthy recovery. Forgive the pun, from the coronavirus-driven slump. Profits at China's industrial firms grew by a third straight month in July. But Japanese shares in Tokyo fell because of fresh worries about the US-China relations. Nikkei 225 down about 0.3%. Worries there, particularly about consumer stocks and also telecommunications, bringing it down. Now, the TikTok saga continues. This is an interesting one. This is the company accused by the Trump administration of threatening national security. Its CEO, Kevin Mayer, he's only been there since June, came from Disney. He's resigned, thinking about the new, apparently, what his global role was thought to be. But given the strictures that the United States has put upon TikTok that we've talked about before, and also WeChat, these two companies have also sort of become the front line as far as the US-China trade war is concerned. He'd only been there since June, and as one employee put it, he didn't sign up for this. We can maybe talk about that. A recap of what happened in the United States yesterday. An absence of anything negative pushed both the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq into record territory yet again. We're seeing this. We'll get some views from the Jackson Hole online symposium that perhaps is going to be a seismic change on inflation targeting. I'll come on to that in a second. A decent set of US durable goods figures yesterday, and that probably will spill out into European markets today. So let's talk about Jackson Hole and so on, and average inflation targeting. This means, in fact, that the central bank in the United States would be prepared to tolerate prices rising or inflation rising above 2% of a certain amount of time to compensate for times when it didn't. In other words, it's a loosening of monetary policy. He will also, Jay Powell, this is, probably ram home the message that the US Fed is prepared to do anything to help the pandemic. Many people this side of the Atlantic are looking at this and saying it's like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, actually, as the Fed has very limited time for a policy maneuver. And other cynics here are saying, well, so what else are they going to say? You know, I mean, this is what central banks are supposed to do. US data today is quite important. We'll get the latest revision to their Q2, their quarter two GDP, and also we will naturally get the weekly jobless numbers. Now, remember there was a jump, wasn't there, last week on claims, up from 963,000 to 1.1 million claims. Is that an indication of this pandemic relief plan, the enhanced unemployment benefits of $600 a week running out about a month ago? We'll see. The brief fall now, my hope is that if there is an increase in this, it'll kick some of these US politicians into real life, and they will actually be getting together to come to some sort of plan to get this stimulus package underway. Now, to the UK, here's some good stuff. Well, right to Europe, first of all. We've lost the UK Trade Commissioner, Phil Hogan, Irish chap, comes at a critical time. He broke quarantine regulations and was forced to take the jump. By contrast, we may be getting in the UK the Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who could be leading post-Brexit trade negotiations. Mr. Abbott was a firm supporter of Brexit from long way away Australia. And staying on trade talks, unfortunately, the Japan-UK trade talks are still stuck on cheese. And we can talk about Stilton if you like. I wouldn't try it. As I was saying to Reuters, the only time to try that really is with a big glass of port, but again we'll come on to that. A price of a loaf of bread here. Now the variation here, because of a terrible harvest, we had a hot spring and we're having at the moment like a wet autumn, and the price of between 99 pence and 59 pence for a loaf of bread. There's a huge disparity there, and there's going to be a price war about that if you actually eat bread. UK-based HSBC is facing further pressure from the UK after the US claimed it was actually helping China by clamping down on executives, including Jimmy Lai, the chap who was arrested and then released at Next Digital, which is Hong Kong's-based his Hong Kong-based newspaper, and they've been freezing accounts of executives there. Commodities, finally, gold finished the day higher as well. Oil prices slightly firmer, but as you'd expect because of Hurricane Laura about to cause an immense amount of destruction in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the global view.
Michael, I just wanted to ask you, how much of a setback is Mayer's resignation at a time like this?
Well, it depends who they replace him with, really. I mean, he had come, I think, to do a different job. He'd come from Disney, which obviously is, is trying to expand its social media presence. And certainly that's what, I don't use TikTok and I don't use WeChat either. really know, I know what they do. I don't have any sympathy. But clearly what had happened was he felt that that company, as I put it, had become right in the front line of US-China trade negotiations, and he didn't want to be the CEO of a company that would actually be that. So I think that probably somebody's going to have a China-based nominee to take his place. I think it does demonstrate the shift from corporate value of TikTok into its political value. I think that's really what we're going to have to come to terms with. But it really depends who replaces him. I think it's very significant.
Well, I mean, with Kevin Mayer, the question again is, was he pushed or he took the decision on his own, considering the fact that...
I knew you'd ask me that, Doctor, and I suspect he was probably subtly pushed, although, I mean, it wouldn't be a job that you would actually want to hold down. What could you possibly do in that job? You're looking on the one side at the company itself, and what's going to happen in the United States and who might buy its US assets. And at the same time, you're looking at politicians in China and you're stuck in the middle. I mean, it's not an ideal job to be. It'd have to be something of a diplomat, a politician and a businessman to be able to do that. And there are very few people who can handle that kind of thing. And why would you want the trouble? He'll get another job somewhere.
Well, just before we go, Michael, on TikTok, we've been talking about TikTok and the US, but it looks like TikTok also has issues in the UK. We're told that the UK is not against the TikTok company building its headquarters in London, but at the same time, there will be restriction on its activities. How would the UK enforce those restrictions, particularly with regard to data?
That will be a very difficult one. Data is as slippery as money is, really, and as it's the new currency, it'll be very, very difficult to do. I think what you do is you put restrictions, put ring fences around particular activities, a bit like Huawei is probably going to have. I know we're trying to get rid of Huawei from this country, but until then, it's ring fenced in its activities, and I suspect the same. I mean, I'm not an expert in digital social media, but I would suspect that what they will probably do is make sure that that TikTok might be in control of, as it were, the machinery of it, but is not mining the data that it would gather as a result of its activities. I would imagine, though, Doctor, you're right, it's incredibly difficult to do.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now, for an update on COVID-19 pandemic, Aaron Akerjala is here with us. Good morning, Aaron. I mean, 6 months today, 6 months ago, 6 months ago, we recorded our first COVID-19 case, the Italian. Of course, it was imported. Did you think that we'll be here by now?
We would have thought we'll be here by now, but that's what we'll be looking at. It's kind of very critical. But before we get into some of those nitty-gritties, let's look at the numbers today coming in from COVID-19 in terms of global figures and also in terms of African figures. Okay, starting off from the global connectivity, we've crossed 24 million. At the moment, we've crossed 24 million in terms of confirmed cases of COVID-19 around the world. At the moment, 24,181,120 are the number of confirmed cases, while the death toll, unfortunately, still stands at 825,794 across 188 countries and regions around the world. So, looking at African figures, at the moment, you still look at it and there's been a lot of talk about Africa and whether or not things have really panned out as experts or those forecasters predicted. But nevertheless, 1.2 million cases have been recorded on the continent. More than 1.2 million cases have been recorded on the continent of Africa. Unfortunately, 28,000 deaths, more than 28,000 deaths have been recorded, with the most being in the southern part of Africa. We've been saying this time and time again, which actually brings to light what has been going on. You mentioned Lagos State, Adesua, and the Commissioner of Health here in Lagos State has been speaking about COVID-19 and how things have actually started. We and I know how COVID-19 started here in Nigeria with the first index case, and he's saying that we're actually approaching the peak of COVID-19 here in this cosmopolitan city. And at the moment, when you look at how things have actually played out, he's saying that from it, we are beginning to flatten the curve and things can only go downwards from this particular point. But there is a brilliant report that was being put together by the Anna Foundation of COVID-19 think tank, who will beg to differ on that particular route or that particular school of thought that the Commissioner of Health is leaning on, understanding the fact that when you look at how COVID-19 has actually plagued continents here, before we even get into the figures, it must be noted critically that COVID-19 right now, where we are in Lagos State, understanding that balancing lives and livelihood, which has always been a challenge for several countries, and for several states, or for several local governments, as the case may be, has always been, how do you balance it up? And with the lockdowns being lifted right now, we are not sure of how COVID-19 would actually react to that. We would see a major spike in numbers. We would see a major rise in cases, is what experts are actually saying right now. That might just be the case. We've seen it time and time again. Remember the countries like Spain, Germany, even in the UK, even in the US, as soon as lockdown were lifted, certainly we began to see a rise in major cases. So I'm still keeping my fingers crossed on how things will play out in terms of Lagos State. The commissioner has also even agreed that the lockdown was not effective. As we just said, balancing lives and livelihood has been a bane and been a challenge for governments around the world. Now, moving away from that quickly, let's actually tell you that the DG of NAFDAC, talking about Mojisola Adeyeye, has been speaking and saying that chloroquine might just be able to at least just maybe kill COVID-19 at the early stage. Because you and I know how in June, the U.S. Food and Drug Agency came out and said they were discontinuing and approving chloroquine. But she said that it can even be used as a prophylactic. We know that. But at the early stage, chloroquine serves to kill COVID-19. Clinical trial treatments that were done, as she claims, they do have proofs from clinical trials that have been done. Now, let's try to see the different stages as she outlined in COVID-19 here. All right, looking at the different stages, of course, she said pre-exposure stage. At the early stage, if chloroquine is used, it can cure COVID-19. And for the severe stage, remdesivir is another drug that has been used. If remdesivir is used at the severe stage, it can also cure COVID-19. So you look at that, and I don't know, the other parts of the world are probably conflicting with this particular school of thought that says that either hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine are some of the major drugs for COVID-19. What she says here in Nigeria, COVID-19 has been proven in clinical trial treatment that it cures COVID-19 at the early stage. So you look at that, I say to yourself, and before I actually come to you guys quickly, we've seen major public figures flout COVID-19, others. And that's why I was quite impressed that one of the EU trade negotiators and officials, Phil Hogan, who was involved in what they are calling in the UK Golf Gate, because he and 80 other people gathered for a golf event, and right now he's actually stepped down because of the controversy that has ensued from that particular incident.
Well, the case of Phil Hogan, again, speaks to one of the issues we talk about often on this program, how leaders should show example, and how when leaders fail to show example, the right example, they should be appropriately sanctioned.
Yeah.
Now, Phil Hogan, in the Golf Gate scandal that you referred to, said he had tested negative, but that he agrees that, well, there may have been an error of judgment. So he stepped down as the EU Trade Commissioner and as Minister of Agriculture of Ireland, which puts Ursula von der Leyen under some pressure. Although Michael Wilson was saying that an Australian Abbott is likely to step into that position. But of course, you know that the EU at the moment has a number of trade negotiations that Phil Hogan has been leading. With the US, with China, and with the United Kingdom. We hope that they find a strong replacement. But the point about leadership is important. You will recall that earlier in the year, Dr. Calderwood, the chief medical officer in Scotland, also had to resign her position.
Yes.
And what was the allegation at the time? Simply because she visited her second home at the time of the lockdown. The same was the case with Professor Neil Ferguson. Professor Ferguson was the chief advisor on COVID-19. And in his own case, he had a girlfriend, visiting him during the lockdown. And that became a very big issue. And there were also issues with the housing secretary and also with Dominic Cummings during that period. So these are standards that people stand by in other parts of the world. Maybe perhaps there are lessons we can learn from that in our own environment. As for Professor Adeyeye of NAFDAC on chloroquine, well, the story, she says chloroquine can be used in the early stages. Nigeria was part of the global solidarity trial on chloroquine and other, drugs under the auspices of the WHO. Even when WHO suspended the clinical trial of chloroquine, Nigeria insisted that it would go ahead with it. Now, the NAFDAC DG is saying that chloroquine is useful at the early stages. Remdesivir, which is more expensive, is more useful at the later stages. But I didn't hear her talking about the side effects, because the big issue with WHO and in the controversy around chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine in the US is about the side effects. I think that we would like to hear a lot more in that regard, so that Nigerians don't begin to self-medicate. And hopefully, we hope that NAFDAC is working in concert with the Ministry of Health and the Center for Disease Control. Not that NAFDAC is just taking its position, and then tomorrow we will hear a different story from the Ministry of Health.
Now, Doctor, since you mentioned that, just like what we're seeing in the US, where we've seen backtracking time and time again, and the latest being in terms of testing, she has said that clinical trial treatments, that people that we're not just talking about random treatments, but clinical trial treatment, that it has been found. So she said that when she gave an earlier press conference, people took that out of context, not understanding the word clinical trial context being that it was actually done in a controlled environment.
Okay, thank you so much, Aaron. We'll watch that space. I'm sure there'll be much controversy as to the usefulness and effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine.